Most of those who play the Red Dead Redemption series have probably drawn a very clear line between Dutch van der Linde from Red Dead Redemption 2 and the one from the first game, for obvious reasons. Following the timeline, in the two parts of the series, you can see the character moving from the stage of rebel with moral principles, fighting a crooked system, to the stage of amoral lawbreaker. Dutch's backstory is rather vague, but you can find enough sprinkled details to partly understand the roots of his behavior. His father being killed in the American Civil War and not getting along with his mother determined Dutch to leave his home at the age of 15, carrying nothing besides a huge resentment against Southerners and a rebellious nature. Maybe this disobedient temper inspired him to dream about a free life, unrestricted in any way. Such a dream was increasingly difficult to achieve. The civilization that was beginning to enter deep into the American cities of the West was also bringing with it rules that had to be respected. And Dutch hated rules, because rules restricted freedom. So he decided to break them, and how could he do it better than by becoming a bandit? Dutch, together with a swindler named Hosea Matthews, formed the Van der Linde gang. In time, they managed to gather around them modest people, orphans and street children, teaching those who needed how to read, write, fight, shoot and ride. Inside the gang, these people found some kind of protection and stability, a sort of a new family, all the more so as Dutch called them brothers or even children. But there were many other indigent people, and Dutch built the image of a generous vigilante helping those in need, pillaring personal freedom, and fighting against the corrupt government who tried to suppress the fundamentals of the Old West.
We have got something to live and die for. How awful for us.
Wealth couldn't be the privilege of the powerful ones. Even those less fortunate needed prosperity. For instance, after their first major bank robbery bore fruit, the gang is generous to the poor people in the area by helping them with money. To Dutch, the Old West had to remain wild, untouched by modernity, and he was willing to kill and plunder if that was to be done to achieve this ideal. But he was not going to fight alone, so he had found his allies, just as naturally, among the oppressed and divested ones. His acts, his magnetic and persuasive presence were the fuel feeding the trust that the gang had in him. That untamed world, that unruly kind of living, were the ones on whose behalf they committed all the murders and robberies. Even so, the gang had rules. Injustice, selfishness, cruelty were not tolerated. You couldn't kill someone just for fun.
You kill, I kill. You rob, I rob. Only difference I can see is I choose whom I kill and rob, and you destroy everything in your path.
Dutch always had a plan to ensure the well-being of the gang, but the plan was constantly changing, and that meant new crimes, new heists, hence increased dangers. Because fleeing everyone and going to Tahiti weren't cheap, and Dutch couldn't turn down an opportunity. By carrying out his plans, the gang becomes the object of interest not only to the Pinkerton agency, but also to the police and the army. Dutch's tendency to risk much and needlessly begins to make him less and less willing to listen to others. In his eyes, even the closest friends may be potential traitors, so he starts doubting their loyalty. The experience and ambition he had gained made him look for perilous ways of achieving what he wanted. A catalyst for this behavior is the presence of Micah Bell, a prominent gang member who whips up Dutch no matter how dangerous his plans are.
You know, you always had the most incredible way of putting things.
I'm just an old outlaw, not prepared to go quietly.
Oh, you're more than that, Dutch.
If truth be told, Dutch thinks he is nearly undeceivable, thanks to his unbeatable instincts. There is no doubt that Dutch was a big and scary fish, but he acts as if he hasn't realized the sea he was swimming in is full of genuine sharks. One of them is Angelo Bronte, the powerful crime lord of Saint Denis. Bronte is aware of the huge gap between him and Dutch, and despises the latter, but he understands the danger the gang of outlaws, sheltered at the edge of the town, might represent for his business. Meeting together at a fancy party, Bronte is interested in Dutch's intention while visiting the city. Dutch tells him he and his people would need some money. Oddly, hearing that, Bronte not only seems to be reasonable, but he even suggests that Dutch and his gang could rob a trolley station in the city, on the pretext that he himself couldn't do it without tarnishing his name. This was actually only a trap Bronte had easily set and into which Dutch had fallen just as easily. But the scene doesn't end here. What follows subtly reveals Bronte's opinion on the Van der Linde gang and how little value his tip actually held. After saying goodbye to Dutch and Arthur, we can hear Bronte addressing his remaining companions.
Ok ragazzi, adesso il vino buono.
Just an invitation to drink good wine, isn't it? Except that, at a closer look, the amount of contempt this seemingly harmless invite contains is almost material. The syntagm good wine refers not only to a tasty tipple, but also to the time for real business, both reserved exclusively to those on Bronte's level. The real goodies were meant to be kept out of the reach of simple brigands. For them, some plonk would be more than enough, and, of course, no goodies for them. Almost as expected, the robbery attempt on the trolley station ends badly for the gang. Dutch himself hits his head and suffers a concussion. Apparently, this event leads to a sharp change in Dutch's behavior. He begins to reveal a more violent and unreasonable side of him. When Hosea died, Dutch lost not only a good friend, but also the only person who could temper his tendencies. And perhaps, since there wasn't any rational thinking involved anymore, the gang and most of all Dutch were unable to carry the plans to a gainful end. Every robbery attempt, every scheme, every crime made even harder reaching the quiet life that Dutch had promised to the gang, as sort of an improbable prize for all that restless life. And maybe Dutch's stated intention to buy land for the gang to settle down had been just a pretense. From Dutch's point of view, the gang life could have never turned into a quiet life.
If we let Jack and the women free, well then
There
maybe
ain't
we
no
can...
freedom for no one in this country no more, Arthur.
Dutch overstepped all the limits he had preached. Unmotivated killings, cruelty, the removal of those who dared to contradict him, the betrayal of the close ones. It's as if there was almost nothing left of the old Dutch. Throughout Red Dead Redemption, we can see him being nothing more than a chaotic wild killer. However, with everything coming to an end, he conveyed some regrets, admitting that nothing he had done had brought him closer to his dreams.
We can't always fight nature, John. We can't fight change. Can't fight gravity. We can't fight nothing. My whole life, all I ever did was fight.
Dutch realized that by his very nature, he had been a fighter. That was all he could do. And that was, in fact, why he could not stop. And why he always had a plan. But beyond all his hypocrisy, Dutch is a realistic guy. He knows exactly what he is, a monster. And he also knows that he is not the only one, or the last. And he is quite sure about the reason.
When I'm gone, they'll just find another monster. They have to. Because they have to justify their wages.
Maybe in the beginning, Dutch was a kinder and almost upright person, having his own ideology about the Old West, being a good speaker with loads of charm and refinement. He seemed to be the perfect image for the perfect leader. All those gang members were his partners, his family. He did for some of them what he would have done for his own children. He was protective and thoughtful about the lives of those around him. But being chased by the police, the army and the Pinkertons, losing some of those who he valued the most, seeing the Old West almost gone, each one took its toll. All the qualities that made Dutch a remarkable leader were rapidly fading away, abandoning his principles, being more and more self-absorbed, vain and grudge-bearing, evolving into a heartless killer, ignoring those who had been loyal to him and approaching those who gave him unconditional approval. All those were signs that Dutch had lost control. Funny thing, for Dutch, loyalty was the cornerstone of the relationship with the others in the gang. It was just that this loyalty worked unilaterally. Everyone else had a duty to be loyal to him and to please him. But he was the leader, sort of a little god. He owed nothing to anyone, so his loyalty to the others was merely theoretical. There's no doubt that Dutch was a master puppeteer who didn't hesitate to use his skills to get what he wanted, without the tricked one seeing beyond the smoke curtain. All those speeches about how special and worthy a life of an outcast should be were thrust upon the gang, in fact, never being more than a puny justification for all the crimes.
You know, that life we lived is over. And when we was living it, it didn't mean nothing anyway. It was just an excuse, and we all knew.
Dutch hated progress and modernity, but he used their advantages. A pocket watch, a gramophone, a pair of good revolvers, a spruced up outfit. Was the progress really that bad? No, not at all, as long as progress and modernity served Dutch's purposes. But progress was also what Dutch could not control. And that was the part that stopped Dutch from reaching his dream. The Old West was gradually disappearing. The government was growing stronger, and it could control the people systematically easier. In fact, all of Dutch's struggle had been in vain, and he could see how the free life he had hoped for was replaced by a much more dangerous surrogate. Perhaps the monsters he spoke of before dying were more and wickeder, and they hid themselves elsewhere. After all, a few questions linger. As a character of Red Dead Redemption 2, is Dutch a hero, a real fighter for preserving old values, a Robin Hood with revolvers who steals from the rich, or at least tries to, and gives not so much to the poor? Is he a good guy? Conversely, is everything but a show that helps Dutch hide his true intentions and nature? Is Dutch nothing but an evildoer with style and charisma, able to use everyone and everything to achieve his goals? A rebel without a cause, or without a noble one? In other words, is Dutch a villain?
I had a goddamn plan!
Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video essay, which I hope you have, do subscribe, because in the next episode we'll tackle not one, but 4 of the most immoral antagonists, and how Arkane fantastically redeemed theirs. Or if you want early access to the remainder of this series, become a member on Patreon similarly to these outstanding bandits. Avirama FM, Badr Al-Kahtani, Bello23, Debashish Patra, Giovanni Pena, Golden Glowmaster, Rahul Mahipal, Realitats Verlast, and Waifu is Laifu. I'll catch you next time.